Good evening, friends. I'm Dr. Aajay Shah, bringing this another great weekend evening live. Tonight, actually, I have a guest, which I have a special bond, actually. She herself is a physician. She is an upcoming author. She's a whole food plant-based proponent. She's at Stanford in California. And not only we share the same last name, Shah, both of us are Dr. Shahs, but matter of fact, she actually was born in the same town where I spent pretty much my whole life in India. She was 2 years old when she moved to America, so she's pretty much like our kids who were born and raised here, but we definitely share the same place in India where I come from. So that's a special, special bond. So let's welcome Dr. Resma Shah. Welcome, Dr. Shah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So first question, I partly said that, but where do you live now and what type of physician are you?
So I live in California in the Bay Area, and I'm a pediatrician, and we've lived in California for about 6 years now. We moved here from Cleveland, Ohio.
That's great. So let's dive into your expertise, and that's about the healthy eating and nutrition. So please, plus first tell us the affair of what we are in with standard American diet, the truly a sad diet, what we eat every day, and what has led to this obesity epidemic.
So I think there are a lot of things that have contributed to sort of the way we eat. I think largely families are very busy right now. They're looking for a lot of convenience. And oftentimes they rely on fast food and takeout and things like that, or prepackaged foods to sort of help with their busy lives. I think people are looking for convenience. And we know that for many families, both parents are working, so that leaves the children to sort of, create a lot of these meals, and they're looking for easy, quick solutions. And we also know that the more that you eat of these kinds of really hyper palatable foods, the less attractive things like broccoli and beans and rice become.
Wow. Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think standard American diet, I think we know what we eat hasn't worked for last 100 years, definitely last 30, 40 years. I think heart disease still has remain number one killer. Obesity, 42% of Americans are obese now. So we definitely are in need of a change in our diet, change in what we eat. And that's where we are looking to experts, not just only to teach us, guide us, and motivate us to be healthy and a healthy lifestyle. The most important pillar, obviously, is healthy eating. So please tell us your views on the role of nutrition in the healthy lifestyle.
Oh, I think nutrition is foundational, and we learn these things from an early age. And as a pediatrician, I'm fortunate that I actually don't have to deal with many of the chronic diseases that we see that are lifestyle related, like heart disease and diabetes. But the truth is that we certainly do see some of these conditions like high blood pressure and type 2 diabetes in children. But the most important thing, and I think the role of a pediatrician, is really to foster these habits early on. I think as parents, we are our children's first teachers, and teaching them about a variety of healthy foods and sort of modeling the behavior and creating that foundation allows them to make healthy choices when they leave our home.
Yeah, I think that's an important point you made, that the habits we start in our childhood stays with us for the rest of our life. And I had a guest about a month ago, Mark Huberman. He's actually a president of National Health Association. And he was very fortunate that his both parents were early on whole food plant-based vegan. So he actually was raised pretty much whole food plant-based. As a matter of fact, he was following a raw vegan diet for almost until age 15 or 16. And he made a good point that he never had the unfortunate privilege of eating processed food or eggs or chicken or meat. So he actually never felt that he missed them. He actually felt that this is the way to start. And that's where I think we need physicians, pediatricians, to start this healthy eating habits at a very young age. And that's where we need, actually, to be honest with you, authors actually who actually take an interest in writing books, not just for adults, but for the family. So we will talk about your upcoming book, but I'm really, really proud that you're writing this book for the family, not just for adults. So let's talk about what it means to be whole food plant-based. What kind of food is included into whole food plant-based?
So the foundation of a whole food plant-based diet is all those foods that multiple leading health organizations, from the World Health Organization to the American Heart Association, all these leading medical and dietetic organizations tell us that the foundation of our diet should be largely whole plant food. So things like beans, whole grains, vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds. That's the sort of foundation of a whole food plant-based diet. And then I think, there's a lot of tailoring and nuance according to what population you're talking about. So certainly for people who are looking to reverse or manage chronic diseases like high blood pressure and diabetes and heart disease, there are going to be some other changes that you may want to make. In writing the book, and my approach as a pediatrician really is that that's the foundation, and then trying to tailor it for growing children, because their needs are obviously very different than someone that's older and trying to manage a lot of these chronic diseases.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I think with growing up children, their caloric needs are different. The protein needs at times could be different. Many of the kids are athletes, and I think treating adults and children with the same stick is probably not the right thing to do. So I think once again, I think you coming on as a pediatrician to guide the whole family is so much refreshing and so much beneficial to the whole society. And I
And I
think
think the
that.
foundation is still the same. The foundation is still the same. We're still talking about, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, nuts, seeds. That's the sort of foundation. And then every family, not only is it different based on the conditions that you might be managing, but it's also different for every family. As a pediatrician, I am not just a plant-based pediatrician. I'm a pediatrician that cares for a variety of patients. So people will come to us from a variety of backgrounds, whether they're cultural or some families that are very used to eating the standard American diet, and it may take some time to sort of gradually shift their diet.
Yeah, I think I agree. That's an excellent point. So that brings the topic of oil. Obviously, people with heart disease should avoid all the oil. Oil obviously is very calorie dense. And I think what are your
Yeah.
views in terms of oil, both in terms of using for the children in a children's diet and also for adults' diet?
So I think that if you are an adult that is managing a lot of chronic health conditions and you have found that a no oil diet works well for you, I think it's perfectly healthy and okay. There's absolutely no requirement for oil in the diet. It's not necessary, and you can certainly get an abundance of healthy fats from whole plant foods like avocados, nuts, seeds, a variety of sources. I think in children and more as a family-based approach, I tend to be a little bit more liberal. I certainly still don't encourage lots of deep fried foods and things like that. But if you're using a little bit of oil to bring out the flavor, or especially in kids, oil can help to enhance the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins. So it can be useful that way. And I think a lot of it is also based on just cultural preferences. I know in Indian food, it's wonderful to temper the spices in a little bit of oil. So I'm not very stringent on oil when it comes to children and especially feeding families. I think a little bit of oil to enhance the flavor or to assist in your cooking is perfectly healthy and fine. But if you're also on the spectrum where you're trying to manage or reverse some of these chronic diseases and you're doing really well with an oil-free diet, I think that's also perfectly fine.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think oil is a thing where obviously less is better. And I think families who take an approach of no oil sometimes gets harder and harder to continue and sustain for long term. So I think a small amount of olive oil, particularly in salads, probably is better than eating no salad and no oil. So I think I agree.
Exactly. And I know if with my kids, if I, make some broccoli with a little bit of olive oil and garlic and salt and pepper, they will eat it happily. But if I think that if I gave them just plain steamed broccoli, it might be a little bit more challenging to get them to eat it. So I agree. And when you think about it, if I'm making, a large pot of soup or a big stew and there's 1 or 2 teaspoons of oil that serves, 6 to 8 people, that's quite a small amount of oil. So I tend not to get too worried. And I think the other challenge is and certainly if you're managing a lot of chronic diseases and you have to be more careful, that's a different situation. But I think it can also make it challenging just socially and when you go out to eat. I always tell people the biggest way you can improve the nutritional quality of the food that you're serving your family is to cook more at home, because you can control how much oil and how much salt and other things are going in. So as a family-based approach, and especially for children, I tend not to worry too much about a little bit of oil in food preparation or in a salad. and really just encouraging families to cook more at home is the best way that they can improve the overall quality of the food that they eat.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point that eating at home is such an important thing. I think even, I mean, I realized that even when we make some of the quote unquote unhealthy dish at home, they are still 100 times more healthier than the restaurant dish. The same recipe, it's just that much more healthier, a lot less oil, like you said, a lot less salt, a lot less other saturated fat, and I think much more healthy ingredients. So I think a lot less dairy or no dairy. I think so. I think eating at home, cooking at home. Plus, I think like as a family, I think when you have young kids, if you start cooking at home and if you involve kids into cooking process, not only they become good cook, but they also become a healthy cook when they grow up. So I think I was told one time by a good friend that cooking skill, and Dr. Greger clearly says that the cooking skill is probably the most important basic skill for every human being.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Indian man, actually, when I was growing up, for Indian man to cook was a relatively uncommon thing. Our son cooks now regularly. Actually, our son cooks more than even more anybody else in the family now. But I agree. I think when we involve our kids from early age on cooking process, not only they become healthy individual in the future, they become healthy cook, but they also continue, transmitting those skills to their kids and grandkids, and it just keeps going on. So I think cooking together with kids is one of the most important skill we can give it to them. That brings my next question, which has been a very common question to all of our guests. In America, in general, we eat a lot more protein than what's been recommended, and a lot of that protein is animal-based, animal source of protein. So what are your views on how much protein we should get? Are we eating too much protein? And what should be the source of protein?
So lots of questions there. The first thing I will say is that if you're eating a diet that's sufficient in calories, so as long as you're not calorie restricting and you're eating a variety of foods, it's very easy to meet your daily protein requirements. If you're eating a diet that consists only of like potato chips and soda, but eating sufficient calories, you may not be able to meet your protein requirements. But if you eat a varied diet with enough calories, it is very easy to meet your daily protein requirements. And the daily protein requirements will vary according to age. So per kilogram of body weight, younger kids will require more protein. And then also seniors, so those over the age of 60, 65, sometimes it becomes much more difficult for them to absorb protein. So their protein needs may go up. And also for athletes, if they're working out a lot. But usually for athletes, they also need more calories. And again, if you're eating the same variety of foods, they're not going to have a hard time meeting their protein requirements. It's estimated, I think, that over 97% of Americans meet their daily protein requirements, and less than 3% meet the daily fiber requirements. So whenever people ask me about protein, I always ask them about fiber, because I think that's actually a nutrient for me that's much more concerning. I think we don't have enough fiber in our diets. And in terms of the sources of protein, we know that animal protein has been associated with increased overall mortality, increased cardiovascular disease. So you absolutely do not need animal foods to meet your protein requirements. I think a lot of people feel that plant proteins are somehow inadequate or not quite as good as animal protein. And the truth is that plants contain all essential amino acids. And the key is just eating a variety of foods, eating enough calories, and protein is not even a nutrient that I worry about in vegan or plant-based families.
I think that's an excellent point you made that if we eat adequate calories, we will get the protein. And I always said that nature is wonderful. Nature is great. Over billions of years, nature has figured out that if you have variety of plant-based food, typical macro ratio is about 10 to 15% protein out of the calories. And if I eat 2000 calorie diet, I will get about 300 calories from protein, and that's almost like 50 to 75 gram of protein, and that's all I need. So I think, like you said, a very right word that if I eat adequate whole food plant-based calories for my daily requirement, I will definitely meet my protein need if I eat whole food plant-based. Like you said, as long as there's a variety, not just eating chips and soda, I agree with you. So,
And there's
that's
I think for some extremes of ages, like for very young kids and for older adults who might have a more difficult time meeting their protein requirements, the digestibility can be an important factor. So certain things like tofu, peanut butter, the protein is actually much more easily digestible. So we'll have similar amounts of protein that you would have in animal protein. But if you're eating high fiber beans and things like that, it may be, you may have to eat more of it. So if there is a concern that, the diet is too bulky and not, is too many calories, that relying on those proteins that are more easily digestible can help.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, I agree with you. Um, let's talk about grains. I think a lot of people are afraid of grains. There's a book on Wheat Belly. There's a book called Brain Drain, I mean, by Dr. Perlmutter. And everybody is quote unquote going against all the grains. I think that's wrong. We need to eat grains. Grain is much more calorie dense than vegetables and fruits. And we all need adequate calories per day, particularly if you are active. So I always learned from your great friend, Brenda Davis, that there is a whole hierarchy of intact grains. So please guide us and tell us what are your views on grains and what kind of grains we should be eating.
Yeah. So I think that as with most things in a plant-based diet, you should be eating a variety of grains. I think the only people that really need to truly be worried about grains is specifically wheat, if you have celiac disease or if you have a wheat allergy. But other than that, I think a variety of grains. I think whole grains are, things like oatmeal and quinoa and kamut and wheat berries and spelt, and all of those grains are wonderful and very nutritious. I think sometimes for younger kids, as I mentioned, you have to remember for young kids, their stomachs are quite small. So if they eat a lot of high fiber foods, it can be difficult for them to meet their daily calorie requirements. So for younger kids, I actually think that some amount of refined grain products are probably okay. So things like pasta or things like that. But I try to focus on whole grains, a variety of grains. And grains are, we know that the longest lived populations around the world, the blue zones, all had whole grains in their diets. So I think that grains are exceptionally healthy food. They help with satiety. They help with cholesterol. There's so many advantages to eating whole grains in the diet.
I think I agree with you. I think actually when I read the book Fiber Fuel, the book clearly says that grains also are required to maintain certain bacteria in our colon. Certain bacteria thrives on grain, certain bacteria thrives on vegetables, certain bacteria thrives in fruit. So having a variety of plant-based food and which includes the grain is very important. And you brought up a point about blue zones, that blue zone people, they do have intact grains. And that brings another nutrient from blue zone, and that's about legumes and beans. And that's a staple diet in most blue zones. Every blue zone person, every day, sometimes twice a day, eats legumes and beans. So, what are your views on legumes and beans?
I think just like with whole grains, I think they're an incredible source of so many wonderful nutrients from protein and fiber and vitamins and minerals. I think legumes they should be sort of foundational in our diet. For some people, it can be difficult to digest the legumes. And so if people are new to eating beans and lentils and peas and things like that, I tend to start with the smaller grains like the red lentils and things like that are more easily don't cause as much gas and bloating and things like that. But legumes are so fantastic. We use them in a variety of ways. Every day we eat some form of legumes. So I encourage them in the diet regularly.
Yeah, I agree with you. Plus, being a good protein source, great soluble fiber, and actually, legumes and beans are called prebiotic because our bacteria in colon thrives on legumes and beans. So I think I agree with you. How about nuts and seeds? What are your views on nuts and seeds?
So again, I mean, I think all of these whole food, plant-based things that we're talking about, I think nuts and seeds are a phenomenal thing to include in the diet. The only thing with children, you have to remember that there are quite a few children that are allergic to nuts. So those, you have to be careful in those situations. But even for those children, my son is allergic to tree nuts, so he can't have cashews and things like that. But we eat a variety of seeds and other nuts that he's able to tolerate. I think for older adults and people who may be trying to manage their weight, just being careful of the quantity of nuts because they are quite calorie dense, but I think they can add satiety, also make things more flavorful. I love using nuts in sauces and things like that. So including a variety of nuts and seeds in the diet is a really good idea.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think that brings a kind of a topic which we always talk about it, but I want to get your views, and that's about fiber. Obviously, no animal products has any fiber. Red meat, chicken, fish, dairy, cheese doesn't have any fiber. Only plant-based food can give you fiber. At the same time, I just recently learned from a great speaker, great guest, that we should not be making a reductionist approach and take a fiber as a only important nutrient. Because if that's the case, a lot of people will reach out to Walmart and pharmacy and buy those fiber tablets and then continue eating their animal products. So fiber should not be taken as a supplement. The fiber should come from whole food plant-based diet. So please tell us your views on fiber and how important the fiber is.
Well, we know that fiber is what fuels our microbiome, and our microbiome, increasingly, we're seeing it's connected to so many conditions that we see. As a pediatrician, one of the most common conditions I see, and it may sound kind of trivial, but it's constipation. And I mean, I've seen kids that have been hospitalized for chronic constipation, and it's quite distressing for the child and for the family. And sometimes we do have to use medications to help them in an acute situation, but the key is really fiber. So having a regular, consistent amount of fiber that comes from whole plant foods can definitely help, not just for the health of our gut, but for the health of our microbiome, which contributes to so many of the chronic medical conditions that we see.
Yeah, I think fiber, I think, as I understand, as I read before, that 10 grams of fiber, if you up in your diet, it lowers the mortality by 10%. I mean, so
Oh, that's
if you are
impressive.
eating 15, 20 grams of fiber, I think most Americans eat less than 15 grams, even though recommended number is 25, 30, 30, 35 grams. And I think if Americans double up their fibers, they will have a lot less chronic disease. And actually, I gave a small talk on fiber, and I said that if Americans eat 70 grams of fiber, we will never have any chronic disease. I think 70 grams of fiber is like a panacea for, because 70 grams fiber is like a marker of how much whole food plant-based you are eating.
Right.
Because processed food doesn't have any fiber, animal products doesn't have any fiber. So to have 70 grams of fiber, that means you have to be eating all day, mostly of whole food plant-based. So I think
And that's quite a bit of food. 70 grams of fiber. That's, you won't have room for anything else if you're eating that many
you'll
plant
be
foods.
eating 3, 4 pounds of just vegetables and fruits and beans. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And less even grains. So that brings the next topic, and that's about the dairy. I think recently I saw an article that a woman who drinks a cup or two of, or glass or two of a milk has a very high risk of developing breast cancer in the future. So I think we know now that dairy is not only just not required, but it actually could be also harmful. So what are your views on dairy?
Yeah, there was actually just an article published, I think earlier this year. I think it was from the group from Harvard talking about how dairy is not needed in the diet. So I absolutely do not think that dairy is required in the diet. And for children, I think, I've had a lot of parents say, well, we're really interested in becoming vegan or being plant-based, but our pediatrician really doesn't think it's a good idea for us to not drink milk. And I always remind such parents that we have lots of kids that have milk allergies. So we always find an alternate source. And the important thing to really ask is, what is it in milk specifically that we are looking to get? So it's not anything miraculous other than calcium and vitamin D and certain amounts of fat and protein, which we can get from plant sources. So dairy is absolutely not required. There have been some studies that have looked at the relationship between dairy and some pediatric conditions like eczema, colic, constipation. So I think that dairy is not a requirement in order for us to feed children a healthy diet. Now, if I have families that say that they are willing to incorporate more plant foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, but dairy is the last thing holding them back, then you just sort of work gradually to kind of take it out of the diet.
I think that's an excellent point, that we have to work with every family, where they start from. I think every step in the right direction is the right step. So I think they may not get there within a month or two, but the
Yeah.
goal is to get them there as early as we can. I think, and sometimes I think I agree with your approach that, becoming too strict from the beginning may turn off the people, and they may never come and see you, and they may go see a physician who actually believes in a keto diet and paleo diet. So I think I agree with you. I think sometimes a small step and a small actually a gain is better than losing everything. I agree with you. So that brings my next important topic, important point, that there is a lot of concern with processed meat, almost considered a class 1 carcinogen, and also red meat, which is a class 2 carcinogen. So what are your views on this bacon and salami and hot dog? And I mean, people eat every morning, and I tell them that that's equivalent as if they had a cigarette in the morning, if they had a bacon in the morning. So what are your views on that?
So I think it's probably most people actually, I think, are becoming more aware of that information, that processed meats and red meats are just really, they don't offer much health advantage. There's so many other wonderful sources of protein. So I think that's one area where I will push to, really cut down, if not eliminate completely processed meats, and really to try hard to eliminate or significantly cut down on red meats. I think there is a shift happening that way. One of the things that can be helpful to people is, I don't think of them as sort of daily foods, but nowadays there are a lot of plant-based alternatives to these things, and even swapping out a little bit just so that you sort of cut down. If they're not willing to do that, in the blue zones when they didn't eat processed meats, but if they did eat red meats, it was always sort of as a condiment or a small part just to flavor. So eliminate completely processed meats and red meats if possible. If not, try and work your way down or find good substitutions.
Yeah, I think that's a great recommendation. Yeah, I agree with you. So let's dive into how a family can start whole food plant-based no oil journey. Let's give a hypothetical example. An American family who eats animal product breakfast, lunch, and dinner has a minimum plant-based food, and is willing to make the change what you recommend. So what are your steps or what are your tricks how a family can start, which is number one, easy to do. Number two, sustainable long term. Number three, very tasty. Number four, enough calories. Number five, enough protein. And number six, very cost effective. So, what are the points you would make to this young family who has like 5 or 7 year old kids and they want to start whole food plant based journey?
So I think the first step is to really find out what their motivation is and how quickly they want to move. And if you have a family that's kind of reluctant or not really convinced, I think the first thing I always focus on, rather than taking things away, is adding things. It might sound sort of counterintuitive, but the first step might just be making sure that there's a salad at every meal, making sure that there's fruit with breakfast. So eat whatever you regularly eat and work on adding in some salad, some fruit, some nuts on, things like that. So that can be the first step because it will necessarily crowd out some of those foods you're looking to minimize or avoid. And then the next step can be sort of making easy swaps. So if a family's used to eating chicken in their stir fry, maybe they could try tofu, or if they're used to eating beef burritos, trying bean burritos. So making easy swaps. In my family, I know that I always try to think about things that my kids would hardly notice. So we swapped out, plant-based milks for regular milk, and it wasn't really a problem at all. They hardly noticed it. Even in baking, you can make a flax egg instead of using a regular egg. So making swaps that you don't even think your family would notice. And then I think most families, if they think long and hard about it, they already eat some plant-based foods, even if it's pasta with marinara sauce or, a bean chili or oatmeal. There are some foods that are very recognizable that are already plant-based. And I would say that just try to increase, instead of having oatmeal once a week, have it 2 or 3 times a week. So I think the first step is adding foods in, like salads and fruits. The next step could be making easy swaps that nobody's going to notice. And then the third step would be making active substitutions. For some families, you can even start just a meal at a time. So maybe just think about getting animal foods out of breakfast. That can be an easy step. And then see how things go. And I think it also depends on the ages of the children. If the children are very young, they don't know any different because that's what mom and dad make and that's what they eat. But if you've got older kids, school age kids, and especially teenagers, you really have to work slowly and at a pace that doesn't create a lot of conflict in the family.
I think excellent suggestions and points. I think number one, start adding instead of deleting. So add salads, add fruits, and add nuts and seeds. Number two, substitution, whatever your recipes are, the recipes you make every day, every week. You don't have to reach out for new recipes. The same recipes you have, just eliminate the unhealthy part, like you said, chicken to tofu. Number three, start doing it one thing at a time. It can be meatless Monday, or it could be meatless breakfast. And I think gradually, I think the way I understand, the benefits are so quick that, and taste can be so good that if you start just a small steps, the family and the kids will be ready to make bigger steps as early as 1 month. I think we just need
Yeah.
to convince, and I think we need people like doctors like you to convince them to give it a small try for 1 month. Once they get the benefits so quickly in their health, in their sleep, in their hyperactivity, in their mood, in their productivity, that the whole family, including parents and kids, almost get hooked to eating this whole food plant-based diet. And I think we just need to get them the first step, which is a hardest step, obviously, but that's the most important step. And I think if they can make that step, I think they will be on their way to the most health they can ever imagine. So that brings my next topic, that many families obviously are working, many moms and dads have one or two jobs. And I always believe in this concept of batch cooking over the weekends. So what are your recommendations in terms of whole food, plant-based? And what are your ideas in terms of batch cooking?
So I think again, every family is going to be a little different. I actually don't mind cooking. I have flexibility in my schedule, so I tend to cook, every day or every other day. My main recommendations are the things that take a long time to cook, like beans, grains, to have those cooked ahead of time, and then you can use them throughout the week. So I love to cook, excuse me, my chickpeas in my instant pot, and I never make just like a small cup of chickpeas. I'll make a large quantity, and then you can use them throughout the week. So cooking beans and grains and things like that ahead of time, prepping vegetables ahead of time also. So, cut and wash your kale and then store it so that it's all ready to go. That can be really helpful. I also like making certain parts of the dish. So like maybe the sauce or, certain ingredients so that during the week you can just kind of pull it out of the refrigerator. And I make this tofu tikka masala. And so I'll make the sauce with tomatoes and ginger and spices and things like that. And I'll just keep it in a container. And then during the week, I just have to, add my tofu or beans or whatever else I'm adding to it. So I think preparing on the weekends, mostly it's just having a plan. I think that's the most useful thing so that you're not, in the middle of the week having no idea what you're going to do for dinner, because that's when we reach for the takeout menu.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think planning, if you plan, even whether it's a cooking every day or every other day or once a week or twice a week, if you plan, you can manage to accomplish anything. And I think the planning many times is actually as simple as just making the list for the week on the weekend, what are you going to eat every day or every other day. Plus, I think planning in terms of taking your lunch from home, that way you don't go to cafeteria, because most places, including hospitals where I work, even hospital cafeterias are very unhealthy food. So I think
Yes.
taking your lunch from home and then eating breakfast quickly at home instead of stopping at McDonald's. Like our suburb has a McDonald's, and when I go to my work in the morning at 6:30, there is a biggest line at the McDonald's for people picking up their breakfast at the McDonald's. I mean, if they just spend 15 minutes at home themselves, I think sometimes the line is bigger than the making the food at
Oh, yeah.
home. It just bothers me every morning. I see a line at McDonald's. I see a line at McDonald's every morning, and it really, really tears my heart. That it bothers me that I've been trying to spread this message, and still the line is getting bigger and bigger every day I see it. So I think we have a big work cut out for both of us, all of us. So that brings my next question is about the grocery shopping. Obviously, when we start a whole food, plant-based lifestyle, we all have to go to grocery store. So what are your recommendations in terms of having a cost-effective but still healthy grocery shopping?
Yeah, I know this isn't true for a lot of people that are participating in this Facebook Live, but in California, we have the most amazing farmers markets. So that's usually the place where I buy the majority of my produce. And I think it's good to pick a day of the week. I think with COVID, all of us are trying to limit how often we're going to the grocery store. And in some ways, it's forced us to be a little bit more careful about our planning because we don't want to go as often. What I usually try to do is I try to map out the week and think about the meals that I might make during the week and then plan my grocery list accordingly. And I try to pick one day where I do the bulk of my grocery shopping and really let the seasonal produce kind of dictate what you're going to be preparing. I think a lot of people are used to sort of picking the main protein like the chicken or the beef or the fish, and they focus the meal on that. In our house, we focus it on the vegetables. So what vegetables look good, which ones are in season. And I think that can be a really good way to sort of start the list. And then in terms of being more cost effective, beans and even frozen vegetables are quite economical. Right now, I know that the bulk bins are closed because of COVID, but when you buy beans in bulk, it's very inexpensive and it makes such a large quantity. So I think there are many economical ways to eat a plant-based diet. It doesn't have to be expensive. Now, if you buy the fancy sea salts and the, fancy ingredients like chia seeds and hemp seeds and things like that, it can certainly add up. But I think using lots of beans, lots of whole grains, and cooking them on your own can be a way to cut down on cost. And then just planning. And I actually like to plan my grocery list according to the layout of the grocery store. And so I mentally walk through the grocery store, and that's how I write down my list. So I can just walk through the store with my list and just check off all the boxes.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think some of the things we do at our house is just stay at the periphery of the store because that's where all the vegetables and fruits are. Don't go in the middle aisles where all the processed food and cookies and candies are. Number one. Number two, when you go to grocery store, make sure you eat at home before you go to grocery store because
Yes.
when you're hungry in the grocery store, we always reach out for those unhealthy food. Number three, make a list, like you said very clearly, make a list before you go there. And as soon as the list is over, get out of that place because that place is laden with all this sexy wrappers and all this hijacked taste food from all these industries, which will dice you into buying something which is going to be totally regrettable and totally unhealthy. So as soon as your list is over, pay and get out. Just like I was just talking to another guest just recently that many times I've seen many, and I've seen myself, and I was like that too just 10 years ago. Many of us actually buy a carton of cookie or bag of cookie, and before even we pay our bill, half of the cookies are eaten by the person who is actually buying it. They don't even wait to go home and eat it. They open the pack right then and there and start eating. The same thing applies to cookies. The same thing applies to chips. So I think that unhealthy food and unhealthy habits actually needs to be stopped. So that brings my important question as a pediatrician and as a writer of the book, which we'll be talking about soon, is that importance of early childhood nutrition awareness and education. Like we talked about it, kids when they learn from their parents importance of healthy eating, just importance of healthy lifestyle, including sleep and exercise and relationship and stress management, substance abuse, all the six pillars of healthy lifestyle. So please give us your views how important it is as a parent, whether it's a single parent or two parents, how important it is to expose the kids from early on about healthy lifestyle, particularly healthy eating.
Yeah. Well, studies have shown that kids who are exposed to a variety of foods, kids who are involved, like we talked about, in picking the food, possibly growing the food, preparing the food, they're more likely to want to try these foods. And during the stage of weaning, which is when children are going from breast milk or formula and starting to eat solid foods, that's sort of a critical window where they begin to develop and accept new flavors. And so it's really important for parents to take advantage of that window and continue to offer a variety of foods. It's very normal. I think a lot of parents get discouraged because they'll offer food and the child won't eat it. And so they think the kid doesn't want it and they won't try again. But studies show that it takes upwards of 15 times of introducing a food in a very neutral, calm environment before the child will accept it. So offer the food, don't push, don't stress, don't force. Just continue to offer, let the child watch you eat and enjoy these foods, and gradually they'll start to increase the variety of foods. And I think it's important to get their palates used to these whole plant foods like vegetables, fruits, beans, things. I remember, I'll tell you a funny story. My daughter was 4 years old, and we went to a friend's house for a get together, a picnic, and there was a big bowl of those they're like cheese puffs or cheese curls. They're like snack
Yes,
foods.
yes, yes.
And she looked at it, and she looked at me and she said, "Mama, what is that?" And I said, it's a cheese curl. Do you want one?" And she said, "Is it a carrot?" I said, "No, no, no, it's not a carrot. It's a cheese curl." And she said, "But does it taste like a carrot?" And I said, "No." I said, "You can try it if you want." Because at this point she was 4. And I think you have to give them some autonomy and freedom and let them explore their curiosity. So she picked it up, she put it in her mouth, and she's like, "It doesn't taste like a carrot. I don't want it." So I think it's getting their palates used to these things, then that's what they become used to. That's what they naturally gravitate towards. So I think it's really important to introduce kids to a variety of foods. When I tell parents about that critical window between ages 1 and 3, sometimes they get nervous because they think, well, my child's 6 or 7. Is it over? Is it too late? And it's absolutely never too late to start introducing them to these foods. But as parents, I think it's important to offer it in a very calm, nurturing environment where you're not pushing or forcing or bribing, because that always backfires. So it's just repeated exposures, enjoy the foods yourself, and parents can't expect kids to eat vegetables if they don't eat them themselves.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I think whatever parents are going to eat, they're going to eat too. So I think I agree with you. I think, plus, I think I like your point about that. Sometimes kids will just say no to a certain whole
Yes.
food, plant-based food because they just are not in mood to eat that. But that doesn't mean that tomorrow they're not going to say yes
Right.
to it. I think
Right.
just try it tomorrow. And I think
Yeah.
maybe tomorrow is no too, but maybe try it day after. I think one day, like you say, if you expose them to enough varieties, they will. Plus, I think kids are smart. I think kids know exactly what parents are doing. And I think
Yeah.
if you train the kids to eat whole food, plant-based at home, even when they go to parties, just like your daughter, I think when they go to parties, they will reach out for those healthy food. We
Yeah.
have actually my niece, she's in Houston, she has a twin, and they're actually exposing, they are about 5 years old now, and they're exposing their kids to pretty much whole food, plant-based, and they have learned exactly the same thing what your daughter and what your kids have learned. So I think starting early age is very important. What are your views in terms of, we talked about it briefly earlier, but what are your views in terms of getting kids involved into cooking process?
Yeah, and I think, sometimes there can be a lot of pressure to have kids always in the kitchen. And what I found works really well in our family is to invite them in for whatever they want to do. And there have been times where my kids have prepared the entire meal. And sometimes, when they're busy with school and sports and things like that, they don't have as much time. But I think letting them know how food is prepared, they have to be involved in some process. So whether it's going to the farmer's market with parents, whether it's helping to put groceries away, helping to chop vegetables. And if they can't do any of that, I say at a minimum, they have to help clean up after dinner. So from start to finish, include them. And I think don't underestimate what they're able to do. Sometimes we think, oh, they're so little, I don't want them to make a mess or, not do something properly. It's perfectly fine to let them explore. And I've been amazed. I think my son, who is now 15, this was a couple of years ago, he decided he wanted to make dinner all by himself. And he did the whole thing, and it was delicious. And I think sometimes we underestimate our kids and what they're capable of. But and studies have shown that the more involved kids are in meal preparation, in growing foods, and selecting foods, the more likely they are to try these foods. So it's really important.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. So that's a great life so far we had. Now I want to talk about your work. You're writing a book with Brenda Davis. Obviously, Brenda Davis is a giant. So if you're
Yes.
writing a book with her, you are going to be the next giant. I can assure you that.
No,
Tell you that.
Brenda is, she's a true inspiration, and she's been, I've looked up to her for so long, and sometimes it's even hard for me to believe that I've written a book with her. So she is a
Yeah.
true pioneer, and she's
She's
just
a
been,
true pioneer. She is so kind and so
yes.
nice, and like you are. I think so. It's a great pair you made together. So, please tell us the name of the book. When is it going to be out, and how people can buy it, and what chapters you like in that book.
Yeah. So the book, it's in print now. So it's going to be available November 17th. It's called Nourish: The Definitive Plant-Based Nutrition Guide for Families, and you can pre-order it now on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or your independent bookstores. It's available for pre-order, but it won't be out till November 17th. And Brenda and I wrote this book for families that are already fully plant based and they just want more support in terms of knowing specifically about nutrients if they're having specific struggles. But we also wrote this book for families that are plant curious. So they've heard about plant based diets, they're a little curious, but they have no idea where to begin. And we divided the book into 4 key sections. And the first section of the book is just about the why. So the health benefits, the environmental advantages, and the issues around animal cruelty and compassion. So it gives you all the scientific basis for why a plant-based diet is really the optimal diet. And then the second part of the book is all of those specific details, the nutrients, the protein, the carbohydrates, the fats, how much, where do we get them? It's all the nutritional information for all the stages from pregnancy and lactation through infancy, childhood, and adolescence. So the second section of the book is where all the nutrition information is. And then the third section of the book is about issues around the family table. So things like that we talked about: picky eating, the importance of family meals, pediatric weight related issues. And then I think perhaps one of my most favorite sections or chapters of the book is how to transition, how to make that transition towards the plant-based diet. And we talked briefly about some of those concepts, but in that chapter, we go into more depth in terms of how you might have some of those difficult conversations with your family or with people that might not be supportive, how to handle birthday parties and other events where, the food might not be vegan. And then the last section of the book is just about practical tips and strategies. So menu planning, groceries, and we have, I think, over 50 recipes in the book that are plant-based. So
I like those sections actually. They're very nicely laid out, very logical, and a great flow. I think I like it. I think why, I think why is the way most people want to start. I think they want to know why they should be doing it. So I think I'm buying the book. So I buy all the books from Brenda Davis. I have all her books, and you are my next favorite author. So I think I ask actually all of our viewers, all of our followers to reach out to you and reach out to, I think you have a website also now, right? Isn't it
Yeah,
correct?
so we have, there's two websites. We have a website for the book. It's called nourishthebook.com. And then I have my own personal website. It's just reshmashahmd.com. And the place that Brenda and I are most active right now is on Instagram. So it's just my Instagram name, which is Resma Shah. And we've actually been having a lot of fun. We've been trying to do weekly Instagram lives, and we cover a variety. It's just a short conversation. So the first one we did, we talked a little bit about the book and sort of how we met and how the book came to be. The second one, we talked a little bit about SOS free diet, so salt, oil, sugar. So, and I think they're saved on Instagram Live, on IGTV, so if people want to watch. And then this coming week, you're getting a surprise. We're telling you ahead of time. We're going to talk about macronutrients, so carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and do a little bit of a deep dive into that. So every week on Tuesdays, I think we're going to try and have a little conversation. So you can definitely join us there.
Yes. No, I think I really admire all your work. I think very proud of you. Actually, I think it's important that finally we have a book for the family, because I've seen a lot of great books in a lot of great giants, great authors, including Dr. Furman. But many of those books are geared more towards adults. And I think having a great resources for a whole family, including not just how to do it, why to do it, but also all the tricks and how to handle kids, the behavior, how to help kids even at the parties, even at the tennis games, not eat those donuts and cookies, and eat some healthy food, and take the meal from home even during the sports game. So I think it's very admirable work. I think you're going to be extremely successful, and we expect probably a lot more money books coming from you and Brenda, and possibly from you too. So I thank you for coming. I think we will be bringing you after your book is published, and maybe in January or February, and get the feedback from different readers and viewers. But I ask all of our viewers and followers to reach out to you on Instagram for sure, and reach out to your book website. And I think I'm buying the book. I ask everybody to buy it. If you have a family member who has young kids, buy a book for a gift for them. And I think I always put that when you have a more knowledge, you not only become healthier, you save a lot of money in healthcare costs, but you actually pass on that knowledge to generations to come. So I think investment into a book like yours is very, very critical and a must in my opinion. So thank you again, and have a great evening.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening too.
Hold on one second.